filmmaker Roger Nygard is a guy I have known for years. I first came to know his work from Trekkies, if you've ever seen the Trekkies documentary, which is, I think, one of the first great documentaries about Star Trek fans, because it really showed the human side of fandom, Star Trek fandom, and why people are fans and the philosophy behind Star Trek and why it's so widely popular all over the world. That documentary is absolutely incredible. Roger Nygard was on the Film Threat podcast to talk about a more recent documentary he made called The Truth About Marriage, which is an amazing documentary for anyone that's ever been in love, that really talks about, like, just in such a deep way, why relationships fail, what makes them work, the realities of marriage and what it takes for a marriage to succeed. That's an amazing doc. Another documentary that Roger has that's out now, The Nature of Existence, which answers all the unanswerable questions in the universe. That's what he told me. I haven't seen the doc, and then also his new book, Cut to the Monkey, is a book about film editing. And he signed the book, not to me, but to an editor that I work with, because when I'm done reading this, I'm passing it on to my friend Bobby. It says, read this. It's pure nitro, Roger Nygard. So welcome to the Film Threat podcast, Roger Nygard. Roger, with that introduction, so good to see you, man.
Thank you. Yeah, thanks. Yeah, this podcast is going to be pure nitro.
Well, the thing I failed to mention also is you work very closely with Larry David on Curb Your Enthusiasm. You're one of the there are very few editors that work on that show. I mean,
there have been 4 essentially key editors. Steve Rash has been there from the beginning, and then I replaced John Korn, who replaced Grady Cooper. I've been on the show 6 seasons, 7. I don't know, a lot of seasons.
Well, I mean, you've been there from the beginning, right? Like, and you explained on Brian, we met up recently on Brian Holtzman's podcast, which I strongly recommend. And you talked about, what goes into cutting an episode. I mean, this book, and I'm only partway through it. I will say this, I'm better when it comes to audiobooks. When the audiobook, I feel like after I give this to Bobby, I'm just going to rebuy your book, which is fine. It's available on Amazon, Cut to the Monkey. And what I love about it was learning your personal story in the introduction, when you talk about just what made you fall in love with movies and how much that meant to you, and how encouraging your mother was when it came to encouraging your art, which really began with photography at a very young age. I mean, it's really interesting to just be a filmmaker. That's why I say it's so hard to you're an author, you're an editor, you direct document. Filmmaker is probably a good blanket term, but really that education began when you were a kid and, falling in love with classic movies. Can you talk a little bit about that, about your upbringing and how you had such supportive parents?
Sure. Yeah. Well, my thesis, or one of them in the book, is that you shouldn't be an editor who cuts films. You should be a filmmaker who edits, if you want to compete with everyone else out there. Because once I started interviewing other editors for the book, particularly those I was working with on Curb and Veep and other shows, I started to notice a pattern. Those who were getting to the upper echelon in their career as an editor had begun kind of the same way I did, which is being a young filmmaker, messing around, shooting little videos, comedies, and learning the craft of editing by being a filmmaker, as opposed to, hey, I'm going to learn this software and know how to push the buttons and become really good at editing. A lot of people do that, and they apprentice and they work their way up, but they have a harder time competing with those who have studied the concept of story structure and storytelling. Because another thesis in the book is that the 3 most important people on any project are, I would say, in this order: the writer, number 1. Writers don't get enough credit because without the script, there's nothing. That's the beginning. It's the basis. It's the blueprint. If you don't have a good blueprint, you're not going to have a good building. Number 2, I would say, is the director or the showrunner, just because they make the creative decisions in all the departments, all the categories, and sometimes there's overlap, writer, directors. The 3rd most important person, I argue, is the editor, because that person is also a writer. And if you're going to choose a writer for your project, you don't say, get who's ever available. You say, let's get the best possible writer we can get by looking at their work. And an editor is rewriting your work. The script is the beginning. It's like the recipe. Shooting is like going shopping and getting the ingredients. And then editing is like giving it all to the chef. Here's the ingredients. Here's the recipe. Now, chef, go ahead. It matters who the chef is, because every editor edits like their personality. You bring a world of experience to your cut, and your project going to be funnier if it's a comedy, if that editor has the experience to make it funnier. And to give you an example of what you're mentioning, when I was growing up and I found my dad's 8mm movie camera and started playing around with it, or even before that, when I was going to kindergarten, I would come home with my drawings, and were they good? No, they weren't especially good. I'm not a great artist, but my mother would say to me, she'd look at the drawing and go, wow, you are so talented. You're so creative. You're overly creative, and really praise my work, which gave me this delusional sense that I'm talented. I still suffer from this delusion today that I have talent. And that's what keeps me going through all the rejections, because no matter how talented you are, this business is filled with nonstop rejection. I mean, Star Wars was turned down by every major studio. You've heard all those stories over and over again. No matter who you are, you're going to get rejected. It's very difficult. You could be the most talented writer, producer, director, cinematographer, whatever, but someone's going to hate you and hate your work and criticize it. And you need tools to cope with that and keep going and continue. And because my mother was so supportive, she built this framework into my slowly hardening framework of a brain that I'm talented. I brought that forward. It gave me the hard shell to withstand the criticism as an adult and as an artist and as a filmmaker. So it kind of pays in one sense to be a loser in high school, for instance, because it gives you skills so that you know how to cope with rejection later on in life, which it's inevitable in this business, which is so competitive.
I would say that being a nerd in high school, I wasn't particularly popular. That kind of rejection worked out for me, I guess. I mean, I've worked in the industry in various capacities and working on films now, but it also, not being concerned about those sort of high school type things or things that only seem to matter in high school gave me a lot of free time to see movies and read books, which is what I mostly spent my time doing, and making films. I made a lot of Super 8 films in high school, but I like to talk to you about what goes into, because the success of Curb Your Enthusiasm, you're a big part of that success, in my opinion, right? Like, Curb Your Enthusiasm was a very different comedy series when it debuted. Oh my God, like, how long ago? It's like
2000.
Yeah. So over 20 years, right? Like, the original Curb Your Enthusiasm came out, and I started rewatching it, and those original episodes, they're in standard def. It's weird. I mean, the comedy still holds up, but you're like, oh my God, look, it's standard def filmmaking here. But it was a very different style, incredibly different style, right? Like, it wasn't your traditional 3-camera, sitcom. There's no canned laughter. It changed the form. Can you talk about like what goes into an episode? There's a kernel of an idea. There's an outline. There's a ton of footage shot. And then, you have to make a story from that. Can you talk about, from soup to nuts, kind of the, at least the bullet points of like what goes into a show and how much time you take as editor in that process?
Yeah, sure. I mean, it's very different from a Circle Takes show. Like when I worked on Grey's Anatomy, that's a Circle Takes show where they write the script and they like the script and they shoot the script and they want you to edit the script and present what they've written. There's much less room for the editor to stray or try things. But Curb Your Enthusiasm, partly because of its origins as a very low budget show, it was greenlit originally because Larry agreed to do it on an ultra low budget. And that's one reason they shot it so cheaply, and the other reason they shot it the way they shot it is because Larry doesn't like to memorize lines. He's perfectly fine with just making it up in the moment. So that was the experiment. How can we do this on this really low budget without writing a script? What they do write, though, on Curb is they do spend the time writing the story outline. The story is completely thought out. And the improv shows that have come and gone that didn't quite succeed often didn't realize that they should focus so much on story. You can't improvise story, but you can improvise the dialogue within a scene once that scene is well structured. And the structure is simply developing a premise that's strong enough to support the scene. And a premise can be something like asking a question: how many is too many sample ice cream tastes at an ice cream store? You know, you go up there and you can taste it. Give me a sample, and they'll hand you little spoons. When is it too many? When there's people waiting behind you, right? What's the rule? All right, that's the premise. Now you set Larry Davis loose in that scene with someone to oppose him who's taking, in Larry's opinion, too many samples, and now they argue. And the dialogue that comes out is going to be, and it was, naturally funny because the premise was so strong. Without a good premise, it's much harder to get comedy. And one thing I talk about in the book is how important the setup is in a joke. Many times when a show isn't funny enough, they think, well, we got to punch up the punchlines. We got to add more punchlines. And the problem is not the punchlines. It's that the setups are not strong enough, or they're not well delineated. They're not concise. And a big part of what I do as an editor on Curb Your Enthusiasm is, well, I do many things like finding the story, but I also make sure that the setups are clear and clean and concise, or not missing. And if they are missing, we have to revoice them. So if you pay attention, you might notice a lot of times, a lot of lines are delivered on the back of Larry's head or over the exterior of a house. And that line is a very concise setup of the premise of that upcoming scene. Or maybe it's replacing a scene we've cut, or it's information delivered in a concise way where it wasn't done properly in the improv scene. Because if they say it, I'm going to be on the face. I want to be on the face for the line when it's delivered, or when a punchline is delivered, or when a setup is delivered, as much as possible, because we perceive it more quickly, we absorb it more quickly, and then you can get to the joke faster, and then the punchline seems funnier. And so just to answer your question specifically after that setup, what I do is they'll shoot a scene on Curb Your Enthusiasm with maybe 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, maybe 12 takes with 3 cameras at this point. They started out with 1, moved to 2. Now we're always at 3. Sometimes there's more if it's a big scene, but I generally have 3 angles to work with at all times on every take. I will start at the back and work my way forward. I'll start with the last complete take where they feel like they got it. And I'll cut a scene, a version of the scene from that take. Now I've got it using just that one take. I've got the scene cut. But it can be better because they did other takes. So I start looking at the prior takes and trying to beat what I have. And I keep going back until I've seen all the takes, and I've pulled all the nuggets from all the takes and improved the cut of the scene. Now, if I started at the beginning and worked my way forward, I would have to replace 95% of the cut, because the first scenes don't have as much useful footage. They get funnier and better stuff the more that time goes on. So the last take generally has maybe 40% of what's in the final cut of the scene. It's a time saver, and it helps me get there faster and get there funnier. And Larry relies on me to choose what's funny. If you watch an episode of Curb that I've edited, you're watching what I thought was funny. I get to choose what makes me laugh. And then Larry will come in and watch an episode with me after I've put my editor's cut together. Like, it's Roger's cut. This is what made Roger laugh. Then we look through all the footage. Larry and I look at all the takes together, which takes about a week for every episode. And as we watch each take, he will say, oh, that's pretty funny. Try that joke also. Or what about that version? Let's see if we can get that in as well. And it's more like a matter of trying to add things. And now the cut gets fatter and bigger and longer. Then we spend the next few weeks cutting it down to time. That's essentially the process. I get to do whatever I want. Then Larry comes in and picks some new stuff, some more stuff, and then together we cut it to time.
How long is that process?
Well, it's about 6 weeks. Sometimes it's gone as long as 9 weeks, because the episodes have been getting longer. You may have noticed as you're watching from the beginning, you'll notice how the episodes in the era of streaming have escaped their boundaries. They used to have to be under like around 24 to 28 minutes, 28:30, 28:15 was the upper limit. Then they started pushing to 28, 29 to 29 and 58 seconds. So you wouldn't go past the cutoff to the next 30-second block. Now with streaming, nobody really cares because it only matters to the networks. They're still pretty firm about their running times. But is that a good thing or a bad thing? I mean, in some sense, we all agree in the editing room, it's a bad thing. We still try to get the episodes as short as possible. Every season, I will say to Jeff Schaefer, the other showrunner on Curb, okay, did you learn your lesson last season? Are we writing some shorter episodes this year, trying to jam fewer plot lines in? And he says, no, we'll never learn our lesson. So we often end up cutting entire plot lines out of episodes to try to get them down to a running time that doesn't overtax a viewer. I mean, as funny as Larry is, and there's nobody funnier, there's just so much you can take until you're kind of exhausted from all that arguing and you need a break.
How has Curb Your Enthusiasm, because I started watching from the first season, right? And the first season has an episode, I'm sure you remember the episode, Beloved Cunt. Do you remember the episode?
Of course,
where
yeah.
Larry David is tasked with putting an obituary in the local newspaper, and it's supposed to say beloved aunt, and there's a typo and it says beloved cunt. Now, I would argue that Curb, because I've been watching the new season as the episodes have come out, it's the same. How has Curb Your Enthusiasm? I feel like there are certain things that have been grandfathered in and sort of escaped sort of the woke mob, or people just upset about, like, I feel like it's South Park, Larry David, and maybe just a few other exceptions. How has that show and Larry David himself like escaped that kind of scrutiny of the Twitter mob?
Yeah, he has. And a few people have. And the reason is because it's very difficult to walk that line. And so you have to be an expert. And that's Larry's strength. He admits, I couldn't do any other job. The best he could hope for was limousine driver, he says in my book.
Yeah.
But this job, for some reason, he knows when out in the real world, ordering at a restaurant, he's lost. He can't make a decision. But in the editing room and on the set, he knows exactly what to do. It's his superpower, right? And what is his superpower? It's knowing what's funny. And the reason that he gets away with Beloved Cunt, or the watermelon episode this season where Larry and Leon debate why black people don't like eating watermelon in front of other people. How could you even do that comedy and get away with it? You could. Why shouldn't you be able to? It's just talking about what happens in real life. And how Larry approaches it is, it's not the words or the concepts that are offensive. It's the intent behind it. And you can feel intent in the way something's delivered, how it's used, and what's said. And what comes out of Larry David's comedy is, the intent is not to be insulting, but it's to illuminate social structures and what's going on in real life. What's funny is truth. Larry David is speaking truth. And truth may not be easy, or it may be difficult to take, but it's many punchlines are just a statement of truth. Because as human beings, we spend a lot of energy trying to suppress things in our lives and not face up to things. And then the comedians bring that forward and we laugh. And people like the South Park guys and Larry David, they have an innate ability to walk that line, and you know what their intent is. You can feel it, and you don't feel challenged in the sense of, or in a racial way or a sexual way or a gender way. It's not about demeaning anyone. It's about, let's debate and discuss what is real in society while we're laughing. And we're laughing. We're all laughing together. And I think Larry's only gotten better and funnier at it over time. He's really aged into his character as the years have gone on. He's funnier and funnier as the get off my lawn guy, as he's arguing and debating and discussing premises. That's the premise. What's appropriate to talk about. Those are premises, and the show breathes and lives and eats and breathes those things.
I want to you spent a lot of time with Larry David, obviously, like, a week weeks in an editing room, going over footage and whatnot. What is there something about him personally that is just something maybe he did that's so mundane it wouldn't even make an episode of the show? Like the most, like, because I just think he's just natural. He has to be naturally funny. Obviously, the show wouldn't exist without that. But is there something sort of a personal tidbit about working with him where you're like, oh, he did that, and like maybe that could have been an episode?
Well, when I was analyzing comedy for my book, what is funny? What's comedy? How do we know what's funny? One thing I realized was that there has to be a conflict. Julia Louis-Dreyfus said this to me, that when I asked her about, comedy and conflict, and she said, there has to be something for me to push against when I'm in a scene for it to be funny. And if you don't have that, the scene won't be funny. No scene will work. It doesn't matter whether it's drama or comedy. Every scene has to have some kind of oppositional force to the protagonist. And that's what happens in any episode of Curb. There's something that is a contrast or pushing back against or a conflict with whatever Larry's trying to do or think or say. So it doesn't matter how mundane the moment is, as long as there's conflict. And it could be a very non-mundane thing, but if there's no conflict, it won't make the show. But Larry will walk into the edit bay often, and before we start work, he'll be talking about what just happened to him yesterday or on the way to the editing room or over the weekend. He came in once last season and said he had been invited to go to somebody's renew the wedding vows party. And he hates these things. He hates going to them. Oh, renew the vows. Come on. How disgusting. Get a hotel room. Why inflict this on everybody? And he's telling us how he was invited. He couldn't not go because it was a friend who invited him. And how do you say no? It's hard to say no to friends because then they'll feel rejected full of conflict in his life, just going to somebody's party. He goes to the party, he said, and he's sitting there and he was hating it, watching them renewing their vows. Honey, I love you. I remember the time we first met. And he's going, oh, this is ridiculous. I want to throw up. I'm going to vomit. And then he realized that they had hired a videographer to capture the event. And the way the videographer was positioned, filming it, Larry was in the frame. And so he thought, oh, they're going to see this footage and they're going to see me looking disgusted at this whole ritual, and I'm going to be in even worse trouble. So now what he had to do was put on this super happy face for the rest of the ceremony and pretend he was so enamored and loving it. And we he's telling us this story and we're laughing because it's hilarious, right? Next season, it's in an episode. This very thing happens and it becomes part of the plot and how it develops, and it becomes one of the plots. But almost pretty much anything you see in Curb Your Enthusiasm probably happened to Larry or to Jeff Schaffer, and they came in and talked about it and then probably exaggerated here or there for comedic effect and interwove stories and found a way to make it work, and you have an episode.
Wow. Alan, my colleague at Film Threat, Alan Ng is the editor-in-chief of filmthreat.com, and also does improv comedy in San Diego, has done for years. You must have a question, Alan.
Yeah, actually, I have a question about editing, your profession. One is, I feel like, when people come to Hollywood, they want to be directors, they want to be writers, they want to be actors. But I get the sense that one of the most coveted roles in Hollywood is that of an editor, that there is not an abundance of people who want to get in that profession nor strive to be proficient in that profession. Do you get that sense too, as well?
Sure. Yeah. It takes a certain kind of person. You're not going to find many diehard extroverts in the editing room because you're alone a lot with yourself and you've got to sit and focus. So you can't have a bad case of ADD either, ADHD or however many Ds. You've got to be able to sit there and get through that footage and get it done. That's going to eliminate a lot of applicants right from the start, but it's a very well-paying job because and comedy editors are paid higher than drama editors generally, because there are fewer of good ones. So they're more in demand. It's supply and demand. It also has great hours because you don't have to get up at the crack of insanity to be on the set. And so if you hate waking up early and you want some decent hours, maybe they're long hours though. I'm not saying that you're going to go home early all the time. It's a great job because you get to be creative, and it's what brings happiness in life. I learned in my film, The Nature of Existence, which you held up earlier, Chris, is what's important is that we have a purpose in life, and you have to choose your own purpose. No one can give you a purpose, but the purpose that brings the greatest happiness, I learned in making that documentary, which is about existentialism, which is asking the question, why do I exist? The way to greatest happiness is to express yourself creatively, daily, in some way. And it doesn't matter how, as long as it's important to you, and that becomes your purpose. For me, it's, of course, making documentaries, editing, writing. For you, making podcasts, and maybe writing. Maybe you could. It doesn't matter what you write. You could write a poem. You could write in your journal. You could write a book. That novel you've been working on forever. A lot of people get their creativity muscle exercise on Facebook or writing funny short quips. But you can also express creativity, through inventing a new dance, just by dancing, movement, writing a business proposal, an architect building a new building, or a doctor diagnosing a patient. It takes creative energy to synthesize something new. And planting a garden, you're bringing forth life, you're creating life. What happens for most people is that the default is to create a new version of yourself that you now have to spend 18 years raising to hopefully be a better version until you can kick it out of the basement, or maybe 20 years, 25 years, however long it takes. But then you're back where you started, going, what should I do? What's my purpose? And then you notice a lot of people, middle-aged people, take up their hobbies again, pottery, painting, finding a way to express themselves creatively. So I guess the lesson is, whether it's choosing editing or cinematography or pottery, is to find a way to express yourself creatively. Even if you have a job you hate that has nothing creative about moving papers from A to B, but on your own free time, you can write a poem. You can write something funny. You can sketch a picture of a plant. It doesn't have to be good. It just has to be an expression of a feeling, how you're feeling in the moment. Any expression of a feeling is brilliant artwork, no matter what format you use to express it, whether it's a sketch or a documentary, whatever. That's the secret to happiness. If you're unhappy right now, it probably means you're not having a way to express your creativity, your inborn, natural creativity that we all have, in some way.
Yeah, I've always believed that the secret to happiness is purpose, right? Like just having a purpose in life. And I've never... and I want to get into this because I want to talk about some of your other documentaries. You segued really well into that, but I've always had a job, but I've never not only had a job. I have a job and then I'm working on a book, and I have a job and I'm working on a movie. I have a job when I worked at my video store job through college. I was doing Film Threat, and Film Threat, what we do here, letting the world know about independent filmmakers. That's not only the mission of Film Threat, it's my personal purpose. It's exposing the world to filmmakers that they should know about. Yeah, I know you're going to see the Batman and Moonfall and all the Jackass Forever, and that's fine, but you need to balance that by seeing independent films that will challenge your view of the world and make you think differently about things, and at least make you question and just I feel like it's a well-balanced media diet is important, and purpose, I think, is a big part of that. And you yourself have had, you've edited some very big television shows, right? Curb Your Enthusiasm among them, probably the most widely known and beloved. In addition to that day job, you're always doing something. You're doing something else. So I kind of get the sense, Roger, that like you're doing that, but then you're making this documentary and this, and you're exploring other ideas. Does that lead to your personal happiness? Like you've got the day job that pays the bills and whatnot. And then you've got these personal pursuits, making these documentaries, and maybe you're not a gazillionaire from making those, but you get some personal sense of satisfaction. In addition to, I know how hard it is to write a book. I've written several myself, and this thing, I'm only partway through it, and you're underestimating. It's nitro. This thing is incredible, because what it does is it emphasizes a part of the process that people don't think about, right? It's the writer, the director, and the editor. And the editor, I would argue, is sort of the last word, right? The last draft of a piece of work, whether it's a TV show or a movie, the last draft comes from the editor. And your book really clearly lays this out. It's amazing. But can you speak to like your, day job versus personal projects that aren't going to maybe pay for a house?
Yeah, I I'm working on my next books and documentary ideas, and like you said, right now, as soon as we're done with this podcast, one of them is I'm working on a book about making documentaries, because obviously that's another skill that I have, and I'm writing about it, and I'm talking to other documentarians, one of which I interviewed Davis Guggenheim last week for the book, and he said I realized he is the same as me. Almost exactly, in that he said that the television work that he does, he directed Deadwood and he's directed lots of TV episodes and pilots. He does those to pay for his documentary habit. And I felt the same working in television whether I'm directing, I've directed The Office and the Bernie Mac Show and other things, as well as edited these comedy shows. And they have fueled my creativity. My need, it's an addiction. It's, how did you get started making documentaries? It's like saying, how did you get started on heroin? Well, I tried it once. And then it's it. You're hooked. And so either you have to continue to feed that, either it's a demon that kills you, or it's a muse that inspires you. And I am defaulting, moving, using it as a muse to inspire my creativity. Whether it's visual or writing, I do feel the need to express myself creatively, because I feel happier. I feel less happy when I don't. I feel like if I spend the day playing a video game and I didn't accomplish anything creatively, I feel like I just feel awful. I feel bad because I didn't get my creativity fix. As long as I put that, it's hard work, but it's not hard to work when you love something. I mean, I love fishing. I go fishing up in Canada every year whenever possible. And I never work harder than when I'm fishing. I get up at the crack of dawn. I fish all day long until the sun sets. And I'm exhausted because it's hard work, but I love every minute of it. That's why I'm able to work so hard and come out of it feeling refreshed and better for myself. And it's the same when I dive into being creative. And I think anyone who does that, if anyone who's not doing that at the moment, you will find a positive effect in your life if you can just start being creative in some way every day.
One of my favorite Oscar speeches ever delivered was one that was not a lecture. I think we've become so used to like, what cause is this person going to advocate for when they get up and they get their 30 seconds to give their speech? But it was Steven Soderbergh gave his speech. And he got up and he did the most brilliant thing that I wish people would copy, which he said, because most people get up when they get their Oscar speech and they name off a bunch of names of people we don't know. And it makes those individuals feel great. And he gets up and he says, there's a lot of people I have to thank, and I'm going to thank them personally later. What I want to say, and you can look up this speech that Soderbergh gave, he said, I'm dedicating this award to everyone who gets up every day to do something creative. And he emphasized the importance of living the creative life. And I feel that for myself, what I've learned is that feeds my soul. While work that I do can literally feed me by buying food and paying the bills, what feeds my soul is being creative, whether it's writing a comic book or writing a script or doing a documentary or whatnot. I think that, I can't not do that. I feel like I've always done it. And I've done a lot of weird side projects. I wrote a children's book called Celebrities Poop. I'll have to send you a copy, Roger. Get me your address. I owe you.
Great title.
It's a parody of the book Everyone Poops. by Taro Gomi, one of the most famous children's books ever done, and I did a parody of it. My daughter did the illustrations. Anyways, but I try to always have like a creative project, and I put my money into the creative projects. Some of those projects, I break even, make my money back. Some I don't make my money back, but that wasn't the point. The point was really to feed my soul. I know we've got some comments in the chat, and we got to wrap up soon, but I want to here's a comment from Frank the Bunny 666 says, I remember Jason Alexander mentioning something similar when he had said no one would act like this. Larry said, what are you talking about? This has happened to me, and this is exactly how I acted. It makes a lot of sense. And he goes on to say, the Little Kicks new dance. I don't know what that. I might have referenced something earlier in the conversation, but do you find it a difficult balance, or do you consciously turn down work? I mean, I'm sure you've amassed enough money now where you can be selective about what you want to work on. Do you turn down work and say, no, I'm going to do this documentary? Like,
often
your documentary about marriage, which I was incredibly touching. I mean, that doc I feel like it should be required viewing before you get married. Watch this documentary. It's really, and a lot of your films can be found. Are they on Amazon Prime?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. You can find out just about everything I've done on Amazon currently and many other platforms.
Yeah. But does that, you literally will just say, I could make a couple $100,000 doing this, or make nothing doing a documentary? Do you weigh that choice, and how do you weigh that?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I mean, if I looked at this just as a financial choice, I would have gone to medical school.
Right.
I would have been a great doctor, I think. And because I would have just gotten good grades, and I like helping people, and it pays well. The end. But I was drawn toward the visual medium. That's what gives me greatest joy. And so I have pursued it. And I have continued to only choose projects that I enjoy, that make me laugh, that I find rewarding in some way. I haven't worked on anything that was a sellout that I did just for a paycheck. And that's very lucky. Not everyone can say that. And I'm blessed that I can say that. I mean, there's a lot of lucky breaks, and there's a lot of hard work. And there were times I was $30,000 in debt, and I pulled myself back out of it through connections, people remembering my work, and then hiring me. And there's the old Woody Allen joke: if you want to make God laugh, tell him your plans. Who knows? You don't know what's next, right? You plan the best you can. I mean, all the war. Or what was it? Michael Tyson said, you've got a plan going into the ring until you get hit in the face, and then it's just a fight. So that's what life is like. And the film business is like. You just have to approach it, do your best, and people remember. Most of my jobs have not been through an agent, although many have, and agents are a necessity. But most of them are through the people I've met and I've worked with, and they remember when I do a good job. Larry David said the most flattering thing to me on this season. We worked many seasons, and he still is like, wow, your first cuts are the best. And, makes me feel good to hear that. Because he's not effusive with praise, he's not who he is. It's the best job I've ever had working for Larry David, and I'm so glad that I had this opportunity. Essentially, kind of fall into my lap, but it fell into my lap because I had worked with a post-production supervisor named Greg Glickman on a show called The Mind of the Married Man, and Greg remembered me when they were looking for a new editor for Curb Your Enthusiasm. I found out later, I'd interviewed 25 editors for this position when John Corn was leaving. And I was in India shooting The Nature of Existence. And I said to Greg, I'm sorry, I'm on the other side of the world. I can't meet. But if the job is still open when I get back in 3 weeks, I would love to meet with Larry David. And it was still open. And they'd only gone through maybe 10 or 12 by the time he called me, and another 10 by the time I got back to LA. And they hadn't found that right person. And because Larry knows how important it is to have the right editor on a show like that. And I went in and met with him, and the meeting was less than 5 minutes. He was chatting with the producers, and then Larry walked in and sat down and said, "Why do you want to work on this show?" And I said, "Well, I want to learn how you do what you do from the inside." And he laughed, and he pretended he wasn't flattered, and said, "Oh, you can't learn anything from me." A few more questions, about what I worked on. I just worked with Mike Binder on The Mind of the Married Man. And so he stood up and said, "He seems fine," and walked out. And they offered me the job. And I asked Larry about that. And he said, later I asked him, and he said that he makes all his decisions based on his gut instinct, whether it's casting or a comedy moment or editing or hiring someone like me. He just walks in and gets a feeling, and then he trusts his instincts. He doesn't analyze it. When I asked Larry, "Why is this funny?" he can't answer that question. He said, "I don't know. I just feel like it is. And if I feel like it's funny, I have to have the confidence that the audience will find it funny as well." A lot of people try to analyze what's funny. And in the book, only a fool, it's foolish to try to analyze comedy, but the antics of a fool are funny. So I gave it a try in my book and created what I called the table of what is it? The periodic table of nonsense. That's what I called it. And I did discover there are commonalities among what's funny and what's not funny. And like asking someone like Judd Apatow, he agreed with Mike Binder, who agreed with Larry David and Sacha Baron Cohen, that the first thing they said was surprise. You want to surprise an audience. They want to be surprised by the direction a turn something takes. That's why you've got to lay down the setup in such a way that they don't see where the turn is coming, and you catch them by surprise, and the result is laughter. The next thing that's funny is pain. Seeing someone in pain is funny. Someone falling is nothing funnier than a pratfall, somebody hitting their head. And as I mentioned earlier, truth, a statement of truth. When you combine all those things, those are the top three. There's others like absurdity, like the story of Sisyphus or the story of Job. They're not meant to be comedies, but they're funny because, things go so wrong for Job that it becomes funny because it's not happening to you. Someone else's tragedy is your comedy. And a lot of comedy, you'll notice, is that somebody's got everything going wrong. And we laugh at that because we're so glad it's not happening to us at the moment. Another thing is abnormal behavior. Whenever somebody violates the norms of society, that's funny. And Jerry Lewis, who was my favorite comedian when I was a kid growing up, almost every movie, he would violate the norms of society in some crazy way. He could destroy an entire grocery or a department store with a vacuum cleaner. And it was hilarious, right? Because he's acting like a child. The biggest lesson as an editor that I learned in how to make things funnier is to do it faster. Faster comedy is funnier comedy. A lot of times there's a lot of what I call word baggage, and Jeff Schaefer called it word dust. I realized we had the same idea in slightly different terms independently. We had come to the same realization. You've got to scrape away all of the word baggage. Now, what is the word baggage? Well, first of all, pauses. Unnecessary pausing. There should be no pausing in an episode or a movie unless you choose, as the editor, for them to pause because it's funnier or more dramatic for them to take that pause. A lot of actors throw a lot of pauses into their performances. They're trying to remember their lines or they're feeling in the moment. It's very dramatic, but most of the time, once you get it, you look at the footage, you got to get rid of all that stuff. It's just slowing everything down. It's making it less funny. You got to get on with it. And whenever someone says or or they clear their throat or they cough or they start a sentence with look or listen, these announcements, that's an announcement. Or it's like clearing your throat, saying, hey, I'm about to speak, pay attention to me. I cut all that away so that what remains flows elegantly and quickly and rapidly from one beat to the next. And the audience then absorbs it and enjoys it more. And I make things 10, 20, 30% funnier than some other editor who doesn't take the time or bother, and I've seen a lot of editors who don't, to remove those things and streamline it from setup to punchline. So those are some examples anyhow.
Wow. Roger, congratulations on the book. I want to ask, before we let you go, ask one final question, which is, one of your closest friends is about to embark on making their first documentary. Is there one piece of advice, one piece of simple advice that you would give that person as they're going to make perhaps their first doc?
Yes, the most important thing in a documentary, and this is really true of a narrative film as well, but we don't always think about it for documentaries, and that's where the mistake happens. There needs to be a theme to the product. What does that mean? It means there's got to be a lesson to be learned at the end, which is set up by a question at the beginning. The filmmaker has to ask the question of the theme at the beginning of the documentary very clearly. And so I learned this lesson while editing The Nature of Existence. And so I reshot an opening where I specifically state what it is that I'm grappling with. And my theme question is, why do we exist? And I answer it by the end of the movie, or, do my best. In The Truth About Marriage, my theme question is, why are relationships so hard for people? And then I'm like an investigator. I'm investigating and solving this mystery by the end of the documentary. With Trekkies, it's a very flawed film, and that was where I learned this lesson. It's missing that theme, or it was when we started shooting, because there isn't a single protagonist or a small group of protagonists who are trying to achieve a goal, and they're facing obstacles, and they learn a lesson by the end. That's the ideal documentary, and the most successful documentaries do that. The way I solved it with Trekkies, working on this with Denise Crosby, we figured out that because there isn't one person that you're watching throughout, we made it a bunch of chapters about individuals. Gabriel Kerner in Bakersfield, or Barbara Adams in Little Rock, Arkansas, or whomever. You knew that even if you were bored or wasn't as enamored of whomever was on screen now, you're going to have somebody new soon. And so that was one way to keep the pace going, because you got to hold people's attention from the beginning to the end, 90 minutes somehow. And what does it is the mystery, right? You set up the mystery. We're going to solve this mystery. And they're going to wait for the answer at the end. That's how you hold them. Or a lot of documentaries are just narratives, which raise a question about the protagonist, like, are they going to go to jail? Are they going to get picked by the NFL? There's a built-in ending. What's the verdict? So you're going to wait for the verdict. You're going to wait for the choice by the NFL. You're going to wait to see who wins the big game. There's a built-in ending. So you need a reason for people to stick around. So to answer your question, what the mistake a lot of documentarians make is to not have that theme that's set up with a question at the beginning, that's a mystery that's going to hold people to the end, and then you give them that answer at the end. And if it's a historical documentary and you're profiling a building, like in The Comedy Store, we profiled a building, and that was a series of vignettes, stories about people. And there's a beginning where the building itself is the protagonist, and it has a rise, and then it has a fall, and then a rise again. So that's the structure of the documentary. When they almost went bankrupt, they saved it. Ask yourself, what is your theme? What is your question? And make sure you answer it at the end.
That is incredibly sound advice, and I can't tell you how much I appreciate it. Roger, the book is Cut to the Monkey. I got it right here. It's available on Amazon. You can get this book. It's Nitro for a filmmaker. And thank you for being on the Film Threat podcast. We have a couple quick comments we can go through here. Roger Nygard, in the industry, how important are technical specs like 4K, 10-bit, or RAW or 8K really? I wish we had time for all
I'll answer that quickly. It doesn't matter. No one cares. They only care. All they care about is story. Is it a good story? But you've got delivery requirements. So a distributor, make sure you meet their delivery requirements.
Yeah. Also, Loom TV says, because it seems many young filmmakers get caught up in these camera spec wars, and it must be a Netflix approved camera and so on. Yeah, I agree with you. It doesn't matter. It's all about content is king, right? It's like, if you're engaged in it, I mean, I think modern audiences, in particular, because of the popularity of documentaries, modern audiences have now been trained where, as long as here's the one thing, I would not skimp on audio, right? I think audio is, you got to put a lot of work into the audio, but the visual image, I mean, Alan and I both saw Jackass Forever yesterday. I mean, there's stuff that's shot in standard def in the 90s in the movie. Nobody cared. I mean, it kind of added to the experience.
Yeah, and you forget about it 10 minutes into the film. You
don't
care what format it's in. You're engaged in that story.
Yeah. And Loom TV has one last question, and they don't create as a result because they never have the best resolution and the fastest computer. Yeah, those tech specs, like that to me is like, look, if the content is compelling, it's going to get sold or it's going to find an audience.
But
But
get
Roger,
the best camera you can. Do the best you can. Check the specs. Every distributor has a spec sheet. Get your hands on one.
Absolutely. And I'll say also the new iPhone has that cinema mode. You can shoot in 4K. You can shoot in 4K RAW. So, Roger, thank you so much for being on the Film Truck podcast. You have to come back again.
Movies,